Chapter 3. Issue of shares. Question 2. Explain the following terms or concepts. 2 marks each. 1. Transmission of shares. Answer. Transfer of shares, by the operation of law, is called transmission of shares. It is a process of automatically transferring property or title in shares, in case of death, insanity, lunacy, or insolvency, of a shareholder, to his legal heir, or legal representative. It is a compulsory, or involuntary act, which takes place, without any consideration, or payment of stamp duty. There is only one party, that is legal heir, or legal representative, who initiates the process of transmission, and hence, there is no need to submit any instrument of transfer. On transmission of shares, original liability of the member passes on to the legal heir, or legal representative. 2. Bonus shares. Answer. Bonus shares are the fully paid shares, issued free of cost, or as a gift, to the existing equity shareholders, by the company, out of its accumulated, or undistributed profits, or reserves. The reputation of the company, and market value of its shares, increases, if a company issues bonus shares. Bonus shares enjoy the same rights as equity shares, like voting rights, receiving dividend, etc. It is the process of converting undistributed profits into share capital. Hence, it is also called as capitalization of reserves or profits. 3. Allotment of shares. Answer. Allotment of shares means giving or distributing shares to share applicants or to specific persons with whom company has entered into contracts. After allotment, a share applicant becomes a shareholder of the company. Thus, it gives rise to a contractual relationship between the shareholder and the company. The shareholder becomes liable to pay the unpaid balance on shares, and the company is obliged to give him rights of membership. 4. Employee stock option scheme. Answer. Under employee stock option scheme, ESOS, permanent employees, directors, or officers of the company, or its subsidiary company, or holding company, are given the right to purchase the equity shares of the company at a future date, at a predetermined price. ESOS is an employee benefit plan, which allows them to participate in the financial success and profitability of the company, for which they are working, through ownership of shares in the company. 5. Surrender of shares. Answer. Surrender of shares means voluntary return of shares by the shareholder to the company for cancellation. Only partly paid up shares can be surrendered, and the articles of association of the company must provide for the same. In this case, the initiative is taken by the shareholder. Surrender of shares is allowed only if there is no other option but to forfeit the shares. Hence, surrender is shortcut to the long procedure of forfeiture. Surrendered shares can be reissued in the same way as forfeited shares. 6. Sweat equity shares. Answer. Sweat equity shares are those equity shares which are issued by a company to its directors or employees at a discount, for a consideration other than cash, for providing their know-how. These shares rank pari passu with other equity shares, that means they will be treated at par with other equity shares. These shares have a lock-in period of 3 years, during which they cannot be transferred. Company has to get approval of shareholders through a special resolution for issuing sweat equity shares. 7. Share certificate. Answer. A share certificate is a registered document, issued by a company, evidencing that the person named in the certificate is the owner of number of shares of company, as specified in the certificate. In case of any dispute about membership, the share certificate will be held as evidence, and not the entries in the register of members. Hence, share certificate is a prima facie evidence of title to shares. Share certificate has to be issued under the common seal of the company and signed by 2 directors, duly authorized by the board, and the company's secretary, or any other authorized person. 8. Authorized capital. Answer. Authorized capital is the maximum amount of capital which a company is authorized to raise by issuing shares. This capital is mentioned in the capital clause of Memorandum of Association, and this Memorandum of Association is registered with Registrar of Companies after paying requisite stamp duty. Therefore, it is also called as registered capital. It is calculated considering the requirements of capital at present and in future. Hence, the entire amount is not collected at a time, but as per the needs subsequently. Therefore, it is also called as nominal capital. 9. Forfeiture of shares. Answer. Forfeiture of shares means compulsory termination or cancellation of membership of a defaulting shareholder on account of non-payment of call on shares within a certain period. Shares can be forfeited only for non-payment of call. Shares cannot be forfeited for any other dues from the shareholders. Thus, only partly paid up shares can be forfeited. The power to forfeit shares is given to the board of directors, and it must be used in the best interest of the company. The company can reissue forfeited shares. If the company gets more money than the calls due, the excess amount is paid to the member. 10. Paid up capital. Answer. Paid up capital is that part of the called up capital which is actually paid by the shareholders to the company in response to its call. The amount which is not paid up by the shareholders in response to the call is called calls in arrears or unpaid capital. Failure to pay the calls may lead to forfeiture of shares. 11. Calls on shares. Answer. Calls on shares can be defined as a demand made by the company on its shareholders to pay the whole or part of the unpaid balance on each share at any time during the lifetime of the company. Only board of directors of the company is authorized to make calls in the interest of the company. The amount of call should not exceed 25% of the nominal value of shares. The gap between 2 successive calls should not be less than 1 month. Company has to send call letters to the shareholders demanding call money, giving minimum 14 days notice to pay the same to the company's banker. If the shareholder fails to pay the call within the stipulated period, company can forfeit his shares. 12. Subscribed capital. Answer. Subscribed capital is that part of issued capital which has been subscribed or purchased by the investors. It is the response given by the public. The public may or may not subscribe the entire issued capital offered by the company, and hence, subscribed capital may be equal to or less than the issued capital. 13. Minimum subscription. Answer. Minimum subscription is the minimum amount of shares stated in the prospectus that must be taken or bought by the subscribers to enable the company to run the business. As per SCBI guidelines, minimum subscription should be 90% of the issue, and it must be collected within 30 days from the date of issue of prospectus. If the company fails to collect the minimum subscription within the specified time, then the entire amount received as application money should be returned to the subscribers within 15 days of the closure of issue. In order to avoid this situation, company enters into an underwriting agreement with the underwriters. 14. Transfer of shares. Answer. Transfer of shares is a deliberate or voluntary act of transferring the property in shares by the member of a company in the name of some other person. Shares of a public limited company are freely transferable. However, there are certain limitations on transfer of shares of private limited company. The member who transfers his shares is called transferor, and the person to whom the shares are to be transferred is called transferee. The member who is intending to transfer his shares has to fill up the instrument of transfer and submit the same, along with share certificate and required transfer fees, to the company. 15. Initial public offer. Answer. An initial public offer can be defined as the process by which a company offers its shares to the public for the first time. Before IPO, a company is not a listed company, and its shares are privately held. Once the IPO is done, the company becomes a listed company, and its shares can be traded freely in the open market. A company can make IPO through fixed price method or book building method. 16. Blank transfer. Answer. Under this type of transfer, the name of the transferee is not mentioned in the instrument of transfer. The transferor signs it in the presence of a witness and hands it over to the transferee along with the original share certificate. The transferee may further transfer it to some other person. In the case of blank transfer, it is easy to transfer the shares without many legal formalities. No changes are made in the register of members until the document is kept blank. When the holder desires to get the shares transferred in his own name, he can do so by lodging the transfer form and original share certificate with the company. 17. Further public offer. Answer. FPO is a process by which a company, which is already listed on stock exchange, issues new shares to the investors or the existing shareholders. Through FPO, the company goes for a further issue of shares, which leads to an increase in the subscribed capital of the company. Thus, every issue of shares by a listed company after its IPO is called as FPO. 18. Forged transfer. Answer. In forged transfer, the instrument of transfer bears forged signature of the transferor. Such transfer is null and void, and the title of the true owner will be restored as and when the forgery is detected. It is invalid and illegal transfer. Company should not register such transfer of shares. 19. Rights issue. Answer. Whenever a company proposes to increase its subscribed capital by issuing further shares, it can offer those shares to the existing equity shareholders in their existing proportion. Such an issue is called as rights issue of shares. The existing equity shareholders have preemptive rights to subscribe the new shares offered by the company. It is nothing but private placement of shares. 20. Private placement. Answer. Private placement of shares means an issue and allotment of shares to a selected group of investors, not exceeding 200. Here, the company does not offer its shares to the general public, but only to identified persons. They can be friends, family members, mutual funds, institutional investors, etc. The shares, offered under private placement, can be fully or partly paid up. Company has to get the approval of shareholders through a special resolution for making private placement.